If you can remember way back to the late 20th century, you may remember a time when computers didn't react to your actions, when text was simply presented on a screen without any option for clicking on it. Those were the dark ages. Today's savvy readers expect a little bit more in the way of interactivity. So in this chapter, we're going to explore your options for making your documents do stuff. And we'll start with the simplest interactivity of all, building hyperlinks. But before I go any farther, I want to point out that when I talk about building interactive documents, I mean interactive PDF documents. You can import movies and make buttons and all kinds of things in InDesign, and I'll be discussing those in the following movies. But those things don't do anything until you export the file as a PDF and open it in Acrobat. I'll show you the key to doing that in just a moment. First, how to build a hyperlink. Hyperlinks are essentially buttons or hot areas that you can click on, and then they do something. And you can apply a hyperlink to either text or an object. I'll show you how to do both here in this movie. Let's jump to page 2 of the Java Code Sheet document. I'll do a shift page down. And I'll zoom in by selecting this text frame and pressing Command 2 or Control 2 on Windows. And let's see, let's find some text to apply a hyperlink to. Let's apply it to this phrase here, green teas. That sounds good. To apply a hyperlink, we need the Hyperlinks panel. And you can find that by going to the Window menu, scrolling down to Interactive, and then choosing Hyperlinks. There's our Hyperlinks panel. I'll move it up here so we can see it a little bit better. I need to apply a hyperlink here in this panel. Now, there are two different kinds of hyperlinks in InDesign. There are named hyperlinks and unnamed hyperlinks. What's the difference? You want to use a named hyperlink whenever you're going to be using that link a bunch of times, 5, 10, 20 times in a document. But if you're only going to be using a link maybe once or twice, then it's better to use an unnamed link. So let's start with unnamed links. To make an unnamed link, go to the Hyperlinks panel flyout menu and choose New Hyperlink. Or you can simply click on the New Hyperlink button down here in the bottom of the Hyperlinks panel. I know I said we were creating an unnamed hyperlink, but you still have to give it a name. And the name is what's going to show up in the Hyperlinks panel. And so I'm just going to leave it set to the default, which is basically whatever text was selected on the page, green teas. The document pop-up menu lets you choose which document you want this hyperlink to be saved in. And the answer is this document. So leave that one alone. I don't even know why that pop-up menu is there. The type pop-up menu gives you an option of what kind of hyperlink you're going to make. You can choose a page hyperlink, which will actually take you to a particular page. Or a text anchor. I don't like text anchors. I find them unreliable, so I'm going to skip that. Or a URL to go to some web page. Let's make this a URL. So I will choose URL, and then we have a choice to make a named or unnamed one. The name pop-up menu lets us choose a named hyperlink destination if we had one, or leave it set to unnamed. In this case, we don't have any named destinations yet, so we're just going to leave this set to unnamed. And then you can choose what URL you want it to send this to. I'll just send this to my personal domain. That sounds good. We're just testing this out here. Now you have an option of the appearance. This is how it's going to show up in the PDF. And you can choose to make it invisible so that people can't tell that it's a URL, or visible. And visible sounds like what you'd want to do, but what visible does is it makes a big rectangle around the thing, and it's just so obvious and ugly that no one's going to enjoy looking at it. So I choose to set this to invisible, and I will show you a different way of making this look like a URL. I'll click OK, and then it's a hyperlink now. It's there. If I select it, it shows up in the Hyperlinks panel, but it doesn't look like a hyperlink. So let's go make it look like a hyperlink. I'll go to the Character Styles panel, and I'm going to create a new character style. You can call that anything you want. I'm just going to call it URL. We'll change its color to, let's say, 85% black instead, and we'll turn on an underline. And basically, we'll make it look kind of like a hyperlink. Let's move this down a little bit. It sounds good. Click OK. And now when we apply that to the text, it looks kind of like a hyperlink. In other words, it looks different from everything around it, and that will draw people's attention to it, and it'll make them want to go click on it. So that's the whole point of having a hyperlink type of effect here. Okay, now what about making a hyperlink that we're going to use a lot of times? A named hyperlink. Well, to do that, we go to the Hyperlinks panel, flyout menu, and we choose New Hyperlink Destination. And we can say what kind of hyperlink destination do we want? A page or text anchor or URL. In this case, I'm going to be saying a URL. And I want my URL to be, let's just say we're going to send it to lynda.com. It'll type the HTTP for me, which is nice, but I still need to type the URL. So it's going to go to this URL. This is my named hyperlink destination. Click OK. Now, you'll notice that those destinations do not appear in the hyperlinks panel because there's nothing sent to them yet. There's no hyperlink in the document that is going to that destination. But if I select some text here, now I can say make this be a hyperlink to that destination. So I'll click on my new hyperlink button. Well, I'll just leave that the way it is. And then I'll say the document, let's leave that the way it is. It's going to be a URL, that'll leave that the way it is. And the name, in this case, we're not doing an unnamed one. We're doing a named destination. And this is simply choosing the name out of it, and this is telling us what that URL is, where it's going to be going. We can actually edit it here, and it'll change the definition. So be very careful about editing this because you're going to be changing the definition. Again, I'm going to leave this set to invisible rectangle, click OK, and I'll apply my URL style. There we go. So now I've actually applied this hyperlink, and that's good. We've got it done. And we actually have applied this style. We can see it here in the hyperlinks panel. The problem is we can't see where it's going to. Fortunately, if you hover on top of a hyperlink, it'll tell you where it's going in a little tooltip. It says this one is going to lynda.com. I'll hover over this one. It says this one is going to 63p. Now, the great thing about named hyperlink destinations is that you can use them over and over again, right? So we can simply choose some text here, create a new one, and say, great, we're going to use the lynda.com style again. We don't have to type the URL over and over again. Click OK, and so on. The other great thing about named destinations is that it's very easy to change it later. If we needed to change those later on, we could simply go to the hyperlinks flyout menu and choose hyperlink destination options. And this lets us edit our named destinations. So I'll say I'm going to edit the one called lynda.com. And I'm going to say I want lynda.com, well, let's change it completely to, let's say, google.com. And I'll change the name to whatever. You can change the name to anything you want as long as the URL is set up. And I'll click OK. And now all of these links are not going to lynda.com anymore. They're going to google.com. And we can see that by hovering on top of them. So I showed you how to edit a named destination. What about editing one of these destinations up here, the unnamed destination? Well, that's as easy as double-clicking. Just double-click on the hyperlink up here. In this case, I placed my text cursor in the link so it would highlight, so I'd know which one is connected to which. Double-click on that. It opens up the hyperlink options dialog box, and then I can change it to whatever I want to in here. In this case, I'll leave it set to as it is. Click Cancel. And let's look at one other kind of hyperlink we can create. So I'm going to zoom back to fit in window with Command 0 or Control 0 on Windows. And I'm just going to make a big, giant, empty frame here, because I want to show you that you can assign hyperlinks to objects as well as text. So I've made a big frame here. Okay, so now while that's selected, I'm going to come over here to the hyperlinks panel, and I'm going to click on New Hyperlink, and I will call this one Go to Page 1, because I want this whole area, no matter where they click inside this area, I want Acrobat to take them back to page 1. So it's going to be inside this document. Yes, we'll leave that alone. The type is not going to be URL. It's going to be a page hyperlink. And we're going to say we want this one to be an unnamed page link to page 1. So click on here. It's going to take us to page 1. We also have an option for the zoom setting. In other words, what zoom setting should people be at when they get to page 1? And in general, I like going back to fit in window. But you can choose any of these different options, the fit width in the window or whatever. I'm going to set this to fit in window, and I'll click OK. Now I will copy this whole frame, and I'm going to go back to page 1 by pressing Shift Page Up on Mac or Windows, and I will paste this in place. Now when you copy and paste something that has a hyperlink on it, the hyperlink gets copied as well, and you can see that copy here in the hyperlinks panel. But I want this one not to go back to page 1. We're already on page 1. I want this one to go to page 2. So I'll double click on it. I'll change its name up here so it shows up differently in the hyperlinks panel. And I'll say this one is going to go to page 2 and fit in the window. There we go. We're done. Click OK. Now we've got hyperlinks for navigation as well as hyperlinks to various URLs. Earlier I told you that hyperlinks only work in the final PDF. That wasn't entirely true. You actually can use the hyperlinks panel to navigate these within the document itself. And the way you do that is with these arrows at the bottom of the hyperlinks panel. The one on the left means choose the object which is tagged with this hyperlink. So for example, if I click on Go to Page 1 and click on this left arrow, it says, oh, I'm going to go grab that object. Here's the object on page 2 because that was tagged with this particular hyperlink. I can also say, activate this hyperlink, do this thing, go to page 1, and I do that by clicking on the right arrow. The right arrow means go do this hyperlink, go to the destination. Click on this, and it'll actually take me to page 1, because that hyperlink was go to page 1. Of course, I should point out that I can remove a hyperlink simply by selecting it and clicking on the trash can in the lower right corner. That'll remove the hyperlink from the document entirely. It won't necessarily remove a named destination. The named destination will still be hiding in the background, ready to be used later. It'll simply remove it from the page itself. For example, if I select this, and why don't we go find that text, I'll click on the left button, and it highlights here on the page. Now I can remove that. It'll say, do you really want to do it? Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. And I'll zoom into Command 2, 200%, Command 2 on the Mac, or Control 2 on Windows, and we can see that it actually removed that entire hyperlink from that text. Now let me scroll down using Option Spacebar or Alt Spacebar on the Windows, and we can see that there's a URL down here. Somebody's already typed a URL here, and I can grab that and turn this into a hyperlink automatically by going to the Hyperlinks panel and choosing New Hyperlink from URL. And when I do that, it automatically shows up here in the Hyperlinks panel. It's actually done two things. It first made a hyperlink destination to this URL, and then it added that hyperlink to the page itself. Unfortunately, when it did that, it only did it to www. It didn't add the HTTP at the beginning. So I'm going to have to go in here and manually go to Hyperlink Destination Options, choose that destination that it created, edit it, come in here and say the URL is supposed to be http:// and so on and so on, and then click OK, and now it'll update properly. The other problem is that it's going to be hard to see this, but I'll deselect it, and you can see that there's a black rectangle around it. That black rectangle is going to show up in the PDF as well, because it automatically assigned that visible rectangle, which I find really annoying. So I'm going to double-click now on the hyperlinks and set this to invisible rectangle, or else we're going to see that really annoying black rectangle around it. Click OK. So in general, this new hyperlink from URL, it seems nice and simple and great, but the truth of the matter is it just adds more work for you because you have to clean up a lot of it. So I don't use that very often. I would rather just make a bunch of unnamed hyperlinks whenever I can. Okay, we're basically done. We've added a bunch of links. Let's go test it out in the PDF itself. So I'll go to the File menu and choose Export. I'll type in the name of the PDF and click Save. And in the Export Adobe PDF dialog box, we can set up any kind of settings we want here. I'll just set this to smallest file size, but you have to remember that hyperlinks only work with Acrobat 5 or later. So it won't work if you do an Acrobat 4 file. I'm going to set this to Acrobat 6 because most people have that. And we'll say hyperlinks. We want our hyperlinks, so we have to turn on this checkbox. If you don't turn that checkbox on, you will not get your hyperlinks. And this is the #1 problem people have. They follow this entire movie, they add hyperlinks, and then they forget to turn on that checkbox. And they say, hey, where's our hyperlinks? It looks like a hyperlink on the page, but nothing happens when I click on it. You must turn that checkbox on. Okay, let's click Export. It'll export both pages of these. I'll just click past that because it was exporting an RGB instead of CMYK, so it was warning me about that. And here we are. Here's our PDF. Let me zoom back to fit the entire page in the window here. And as I'm moving my cursor around the page, it doesn't look like there's anything special, but I know that this whole left side is a navigation unit. So if I click on that area, you see the cursor changes. I click there, it takes me to page 2. That's pretty cool. This whole left area over here will take me back to page 1. So I now have a navigation built in. Now, of course, in your documents, you wouldn't have it be a whole just empty blank area, but I wanted to point out that you can create any object on your page that you can create, you can turn into a hyperlink. So there we go. We've got navigation left and right. If I hover over here, the cursor changes, and I can see that that's going to take us to that URL that we created. Let's go ahead and press a Command 2 or Control 2 on Windows to fit the width in the window, and we can see our URLs here work just as well. That one's going to take us to 63. That one's going to take us to Google. If there's any chance your documents will be read on screen, you owe it to yourself and your readers to create hyperlinks that help them navigate the document or jump to other resources. In the next movie, we'll look at a second form of navigation in PDF files, bookmarks.